are going to impact us, but is there anything else that you think would be of greatest impact to us during the budget cycle?
I think the tax package, the FRS bill, I'm not aware of anything else at this time. Obviously, a lot happened from Friday, June 13th, when the conference reports came out, to Monday, June 16th. Well, let me back up. The conference report language actually came out on Saturday afternoon, June 14th. Friday night, we got an outline of what would be in the tax package. I'm not aware of anything else at this time, but obviously, if we discover other issues, I'll be sure to pass that along as quickly as possible. But at this time, I think those would be the big ticket items that I'm aware of.
And diplomatically, since the governor apparently is going to be here Friday, what do you expect any surprises before July 1st?
I don't. I would anticipate I know he's expressed support for some of the provisions in the tax package, so it would surprise me. I don't see him vetoing that bill, but obviously we don't know that yet for a fact. But I would anticipate that bill will be signed, and then I think there'll be a push, obviously, for the next session in terms of property tax, which would have to go on the ballot, obviously, and that would be the 2026 election cycle, November 2026.
Yeah, and just we've talked about this. One of the things that I think is interesting about that is from a fiscal perspective, the outlook for this year and next year are very different from the outlook that we have for 27 and 28. I know that the governor has been focusing on putting money in reserves for 26. So I would assume that, true to form, right? There's going to be some vetoes and there's going to be money put in reserves to get everyone through 26. But if you push the property conversation out a year, because it has to go on the ballot, right? It would go on a gubernatorial, and then by the time it gets effectuated, that would give municipalities and counties 2 to 3 years to prepare for whatever that shortfall is. Whether by design or, whether by design or just timing, right? That's one of the things that we've discussed, that will happen. All right, wonderful. So if no one has any more questions for Jess, we're good?
Do not.
All right, Jess, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon. All right, everyone. So I've asked Yenka to pass out some information that I wanted presented to you all. Specifically, I wanted to start today with the budget and the personnel growth. If I had to pick a theme for this, I would say that this part of our conversation, from my vantage point, is about protecting services but streamlining staff, right? So this concept of creating a smarter government. And like I said, one of the things that I want to discuss is I don't necessarily believe that this is last in, first out. I understand that that is a part of this conversation, but I don't necessarily believe that that is the only thing that we should consider. So if Yenka can come on down and explain this. The other thing that is included, if you look at we'll talk about the numbers and the growth. The second thing that is included is the general fund breakout. As I mentioned in our first meeting, I'm really not focusing on the enterprise fund because our emergency is a general fund emergency. So we can talk, we have plenty of time to talk about the enterprise funds, but this is really about the general fund and what are the departments that draw most from the general fund, what are our options within that. And we have, over the last year, 2 years, 3 years, made a series of commitments. And we also have an obligation to honor those contractual commitments. We do have some flexibility within those, but I wanted to start by looking at the personnel growth and having a conversation with Yenka about what we have been working on in terms of explaining that to the board and the options. Thank you,
Good
Yenka.
afternoon. Good afternoon through the chair. Yinka Majakodemi, Commission Auditor. We look back 5 years as you requested, Commissioner, Chairwoman, to the pre-pandemic data, and we have several tables in front of you. The first table we started off with was the overall budget, just to identify that the overall budget grew by from $9 billion to what it is today, about $12.7 billion. And out of that, we wanted to highlight the operating side of this, which was $5.7 billion back in 2021 and is at $8 billion today. We also highlighted the position growth from the 2021 budget till today, which is 28,000 employees to about 28,000 positions to 31,000 positions. And one of the breakouts that we included, Chairwoman, as you requested, was just to give some context to the operating side of the budget. The operating side of the budget primarily comprises of personnel costs, and we identified that that's about 57%. And so when you move down into the rest of the operating budget, we identified that for most departments, every department is different, but you have about 25 to about 40% operational costs. These costs are different because they're contractually obligated, which means at some point in time, the item came before the board, we approved an item that gave a multi-year contract that has to be paid every year. Just in terms of speaking about flexibility. And once you get past that, you have only about 3 to 18% of what we consider non-contractual obligations. And they're your typical training, supplies, vehicles, materials, and other non-contractual purchase of software. And so we want to present this in a way where you could see the true breakout of the budget and where the flexibility or perceived flexibility may lie. We also identified, to close out, that at some time during this year, you have about 4,000 to 5,000 vacant positions. Obviously, it's very variable. Hiring and retirement constantly happen in the county. But wanted to also highlight that. So I don't know if you have any question on the data at the high level that we presented, but I can move on into the next page, which is a snapshot of the core drivers of the general fund and the percentage of general fund by department. And the reason why we put this together, as you requested us, was to kind of clarify that there's a typical terminology where you hear general fund departments. But for the most part, most departments have other components that is not general fund. So I wanted to identify which portions of the budget is actually general fund versus other funding sources. Because it's very difficult to pinpoint a department and call them a general fund department, even though they might be predominantly funded by general fund, they have other funding sources that are very variable. So that's the data at the high level. I'll be available for any questions.
Thank you. So commissioners, I wanted to present this to you because obviously one of the things that happens in a budget is a reduction of open positions that have not been filled, a freezing of open positions that have not been filled, and a conversation about early retirement, separation, and in very difficult situations, a transition from permanent to temporary, to not employed, or a straight up firing. So, right? I wanted you all to see the percentage, of the budget, right? Because I think, and to really consider what our existing contractual obligations are and what is the other flexibility as to what we can and cannot do. Because one of the things that comes up a lot is, we direct the administration to do a series of things every month, and those things go adding up, right? In or outside of the budget and these budgetary lines. So I really wanted to present this so that you can see some of this growth, depending on the department, is growth created by, an investment in a capital project, in different programming, in a shift of programming. Some of them can be our directives, right? These are us, this is the administration effectuating our directives. Some of it, I believe, and that's why I wanted you to see where we had the greatest growth, is subject to the ARPA money, right? And the money that we received from the pandemic. So that's why I really want to focus this on the right sizing. And when I talk about, first in, last in, first out, what I don't want is that we eliminate a series of people that are doing day-to-day jobs that make $50,000, $60,000 without considering someone at the top that's making $250,000, $280,000, right? How many of those lower level jobs that interface with residents continuously do you have to eliminate in order to get to the price point, right, of someone further up who may or may not, be providing something of value, and that's the conversation that I want to have. I don't want it to be just, these are the people that we hire. I didn't want anyone to look at these numbers and say, these are the people that we hired at the lowest part of this over the last 2 years, and these are the ones that we're eliminating. So that's my first comment on that. And then
Madam Chair,
the second page, yeah.
If I may
course.
piggyback on that, I happen to agree with everything you're saying. Would it be possible to perhaps identify some of these tasks, right?
Well,
Identify what these positions are, identify what the tasks are, because if there is some overlap, perhaps that is a place where we can look to identify the functions of these positions, right?
What I've asked Yanka to look at is union versus non-union.
Okay.
So that's another way, right? Like who is classified and who is unclassified. And then, Yanka, if you want to speak to that, we talked a little bit about that.
Yes, we did talk about that. We don't have the final data, but we'll be ready for the next meeting because what we're realizing is that even in the non-bargaining union side, we have to still break it down by the type of tasks, right?
Right.
So we're working on that data, and we'll be able to present it for the next meeting.
So that's the next analysis, right? So if you all agree with me, right, that's like the next step to really look at those positions. Now, granted, while we're having these conversations, the mayor's going to be presenting a budget. So obviously, we're working from last year's budget, and now we're going to be presented with a new budget. So we'll have to course correct a little bit, right there in terms of, what changes are from what we had proposed and what the mayor is going to provide us with. So the idea is to give us a perspective on some of these folks, what exactly are these positions? What are the tasks associated with them? And what is the impact on services? My question really is, what is the impact on services? We know that as part of this process, we have one of the things that we must do is reduce the workforce because we have to right-size government. And I think as we do that, we should look at the fiscal impact, but we should also look at the impact that it has on services. Because, is what we're cutting directly impacting services versus something that's indirectly impacting services? And what is the cost benefit on that? Because as I mentioned, you can eliminate, 3 parks employees, right, at 40,000.
But what is that going to mean? What is that going to mean for the resident that's going to the
Exactly.
park?
Exactly.
And so I have to agree with you because look, I look at it from the private sector perspective. So, and I'm not saying that this is happening at all. This is just an example. If you have a chief executive officer that has a secretary who has a secretary who has a secretary, that is a problem, right? And if and perhaps you could just have these three people that are under the chief executive officer who's making $500,000 a year perform the duty that person's supposed to be performing, perhaps even better, right? So, I'm not suggesting that we need to get rid of anybody, but what I am suggesting is perhaps we need to look at these as what is the task, what does that mean for the resident, and how can we provide the best possible service at the most cost efficient manner for the taxpayer.
Well, I mean, I agree with you, and that's the idea of this conversation. And Carla Denise, we've talked about this. There will be reduction in workforce. That's a non-negotiable. Where we are right now, there will be a reduction in workforce, correct?
Through the chair, and thank you for asking the question. the mayor and her team are diligently pulling together the budget that she will propose to this body on July 15th. What we have done is we looked at the gap between how much money we have and how much money we would need to not only sustain the level of service, but to address the desired increases and changes in service that have come not just from the BCC, but from the departments in the community. I think you all know that the gap that we were originally working with was about $387 million. And then with what Jess just presented, we added about another $15 million to that. So we're actively looking to close that gap of 402. Government does a yin-yang all the time. We can only spend the money we have. So in the years that you saw growth, it was because rolls growth, the tax roll grew. We had more money to spend. Because we're a nonprofit and we cannot give that money to shareholders, we spend that money to provide services to the community based on the mayor's desire and direction. That's why she's the mayor. And so we did grow over the last 5 years as a result of the revenues growing. We are in a very different position. I want to make sure people are very clear that this is not an expense problem, it's a revenue problem. We don't have the revenue that we had in the past. So therefore, Madam Chair, you're absolutely right. If 50% of what we spend money on is people, then I have to figure out how to spend less money. Our approach has not been to think about who we're going to cut or what positions we're going to cut. Our approach has been looking at the long-term growth and the cost curve. We need to bend the cost curve. I project, and I've had this conversation with Commissioner Gonzalez, is that government will probably be about 10, 15% smaller in future years, right? Based on what we see happening with our federal government and our state government. So we're not just looking at positions that we need to eliminate to meet that number. We're looking at programs and services, Madam Chair, that you mentioned that maybe we don't need to maintain over time because their value is not as great today as they may have been in the past. And so based on that, if there are jobs associated with that work that no longer exist, we will actually do our best to figure out how to repurpose people, how to help ensure people have places to go and work where they're being used meaningfully and they can sustain their livelihood. So our goal isn't just to eliminate positions. Our goal is to actually eliminate programs and services that are adding to our cost that we don't want or need to sustain in the future because we know that government will be smaller. And then for those people who are impacted, figure out the best way to support them and support their families, whether in government or outside of government, because that is the value of our mayor, and I'm pretty confident it's also the value of those at this dais.
I agree with you. And like I said, I think that there's a lot of services that this government provides that is outside the scope of its original intent. And I have mentioned these things before. I think we've been little by little having an understanding of that. And listen, this happened at the school board in 2010 and 2011. I know, JC, that you also in those years, right, dealt with this. This is cyclical, but within that economic cycle, there is the opportunity to establish what is the purpose of this regional government moving forward. And I think that's where we're at. And so there's a lot of things. And I think one of the topics that I wanted to touch on today that I think is important is just deal with the elephant in the room, which is the employment piece, because I don't think that we can have a conversation about balancing this budget without having a conversation about changing the dynamics given the number. So I think everybody needs to understand that that's going to be part of the pain point. The other part is our funding of certain programs, which we have done historically, which may not make sense at this moment, because they are outside the scope of providing regional services. And then beyond that, I think we also have things that we just need to cut back Marketing and advertising is one of them. The marketing and advertising budget for all of many departments is I believe a place where we can cut back for the next few years. And we've started to do this. We brought an item so that now we don't have to advertise, on newspapers. Nothing against, newspapers, but it's an opportunity for us to save some money and be more efficient. And I think that that's something that we need to look at across the board. I think if we tell our residents, what our marketing dollars are, and by the way, some of this is important because we're getting information out to residents, but at the same time, we also have social media. We also have other ways that we can contact people. We can contact them by email. There's lots of different ways that we can contact people. We don't have to keep doing it the same way that we've been doing it for 20 years. There is an opportunity here to really cut costs on that side. So I think that within the paradigm of these departments, before we cut programming, we need to look at other things, because I think that's going to be another pain point, right? Where we say, well, we have to cut something, right? We're gonna cut programming. I think before we cut programming, we have to cut some of this marketing and some of this advertising, and not forever, just for now, and find alternatives that work in terms of notice requirements, whether statutorily, or from this board, but don't have us constantly, outlaying funds that we can use for other things. And we can pick up some of that slack too. As commissioners, we can also commit to the administration and to the departments that we're going to help push out this information, right? And then we're going to use our outreach to kind of bring them on board so that they don't have to do things on their own. So I think that there's a lot of opportunities there that we can work on together, but it's really about right sizing and focusing on what we should, what are our priorities as a board and as a community. And I think that what we need to focus on is providing the level of service or better, and having the departments show us where they have cut costs and looking at what's possible in terms of cutting more costs. So having said that, I do want you all to look at the different departments, just because I think, when I talk about the general fund, I think it's important for us to look at, what departments receive the bulk of their money from general funds. I think that that's a necessary part of this, because there's certain departments that we discuss a lot about, but when you look at the breakdown, I think it's very telling, right? It's very telling as to where the general fund money is going, and I think that we should provide some guidance to the administration on some of these issues and try to figure out, what works for the board and what we want to prioritize. So having said that, do you guys have any questions for Yenka on this particular item?
The one thing I will say, Yenka, is obviously as you do this, and this is, I think you need to have all of us, whether it's presenting the information to Chairwoman Regalado's committee, make sure the rest of us also get this information. As I told you recently, that's one of the things that I do have a little bit of an issue with, which is access to information for all of us, timely. I don't disagree with anything that Commissioner Regalado or Commissioner Gonzalez have said. I do believe, and I do think the administration has the intent of coming back with something, as Mr. Neese said, that we'll hopefully, be reasonable, will be something that'll last, that it won't be, and I know that we're probably gonna have another difficult year next year, and maybe things will balance out a bit. The way that I see efficiencies in government, it's not always just cutting. I think my biggest problem has been, since I got here, is the measuring. I think it's very difficult to make a great decision on cutting if you haven't measured. Something as simple as a program at a park, I'll use that as an example. There may be a time that Project X is great, but 10 years later, it's maybe not as good for the community because people's tastes have changed. And so I'll use sports as an example. Let's use the pickleball people, right? So they're everywhere now. I know we all get tortured by pickleball, right?
Pickleball's good, man. Pickleball's good.
It is good. It is good. But they're everywhere. But then
They're all late adapters. I brought
Right.
that up like 5 years ago.
Yes.
now the tennis
You
people
are
are
the
coming.
original pickleball queen.
But now the tennis people are coming back. So I think if we don't measure, it's going to be very difficult for us, which is one of the things that I've always been concerned with. Government has a little bit different from, as Commissioner Gonzalez said, when you have your own law firm, you know where the numbers are at because you can't pay yourself if you don't bring in more than you provide. 20 years ago, probably 25 years ago, every lawyer had one secretary. Today, that's not the case anymore. Some have none. Some might have one for every 5 lawyers, right? Things change. And artificial intelligence is even to change that even more so. My only concern as we go through this budget is for us to try to keep in mind that whatever we do this year should really be consistent with our value system as a government, our culture as a government moving forward. Again, I think that there are many things that have changed in county government. Number one is term limits, which is why most of us are here, right? I would probably say. Number two is obviously, there were last number of years, it was money that was being pumped into local governments because of the crisis we had nationally. That's gone. But I think the third thing, and there's a discussion that Commissioner Regalado brought up is, we are a regional government. We're not really, we're one of the few places in this country where, we're part regional, part municipal. And that's complex, whether it's West Miami, whether it's Doral, whether it's Miami Beach, sometimes there's duplicative services, sometimes, so I think that as we go through this budget, what's important for us is to think, and we're not going to solve next year's budget problems today because things will change, but I would like all of us to keep in mind of creating a culture of where we're going. I agree with you 100%. We should right-size it. The question becomes, how do we right-size it? And that really becomes an issue. One of the problems government always had, and before probably the last 25, 30 years is government had a tough time attracting people because it couldn't compete with private industry. That changed a bit. And then it flips back. And like Commissioner Regalado says, it's cyclical. Sometimes, engineering company X offers blank and all of a sudden, but then, things get tight. People get let go in the private sector. A government job is better. So we need to make sure that we maintain and keep the people who are great leaders within the system. I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater either. So, and I think that the important part of it, and I'm glad that you provided this, thank you so much for providing this percentage of the general fund, because that's probably something that most of us were not so
How do you see what I've been saying about the jails?
aware or cognizant about. I know you wake up trying to get rid of the jails. I got you. But look, I think we're all on the same side. But what I would like to see from us here on our side, because obviously the administration is going to proffer what they're going to proffer, is that we try to create a culture where we are as in tune as possible with the right sizing of government, doing it the right way. And I hope we don't do it just so it's a headline, but a true right sizing, because I think what's happened in Miami-Dade County government for many years, way before any of us got here, by the way, even before the mayor got here as a commissioner, is business as usual. And I think we have to try to, if we can, change that. And that does mean, looking at Program X that maybe has been going on for years and it's just not effective. Contract Y, that's been this way and it's not that effective. So I hope we all keep that in mind.
Agree.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, Commissioner.
So, I mean, I agree with so much of what you just said and a lot of what Chairman Regalado has said as well. For the folks at home, the folks that are watching, I want to emphasize, you're not going to get this from the TV, but it is very tense and serious in here, right? Definitely way more difficult than I could have ever imagined, especially hearing that there's a high possibility that perhaps, some folks are going to have to lose their employment. And I want to commend Carla Denise, as always, very elegant and expressed it in the best way that we should, right? We want to make sure that should the worst have to happen, we want to make sure that folks are treated humanely, and that there are some options for folks. But I think Chairwoman Regalado said it best in that we need to concentrate on necessities, and those necessities of government function over things that are just nice to have. And I think that that's exactly what Chairman Bermudez was saying, because, and Carla Denise can attest to this. I mean, I remember when, and I've had conversations with ex-Governor Bush. He had something called a zero-based budget, where every single year you came back and you actually accounted for every penny that you spent. And the more that I hear my colleagues here speak, the more I start thinking about, what a zero-based budget would look like for Miami-Dade County. And what worries me, to be quite honest with you, and I want to give some tasks to our great commission auditor, but what worries me is that we're looking at a July 9th meeting where we're hopefully going to be able to see this budget, and hopefully going to be able to do a deep dive, and hopefully going to be able to have, I've had great conversations with the mayor already, but I hope that we're going to have transparent conversations, because to Commissioner Regalado's point earlier, I would hate to have certain folks not have employment when they deserve and have tried very hard to deliver services, right? And so I would look at leadership. That's what I would do. If it was like in my law firm, if your department is not performing, who's the leader of that department and where's the top at? And I only say that because I don't want to start from the bottom down. And I think you made that point, Commissioner Regalado. And sometimes there are several different issues, but I really want to look at efficiency. And I think Carla Denise has done that tremendously at the state level. So I really want to look at what that efficiency is. And I'd love to work with the Commissioner Auditor's team just to find out. I want to know tasks. I want to know what people are doing, what their job requirements are, and who's performing at the highest level. Because you should not punish folks that are going above and beyond. And I say that as I look at my great firefighters in the back, right? So when somebody's putting money away and doing everything they can to make sure that they're functioning lean and mean, you don't punish them, right? So yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. And we've all talked to Billy about their reserves. The mayor knows where we stand on that. But Yenka, regarding that, we had discussed it, and I think it's important for you to talk to a little bit about that. And again, Yenka's doing this analysis to this budget. So we're going to have, to the historical information that we have. Then there'll be a bit of a scurry as we try to match it up to the budget that we're going to be presented. But the idea is to take a look at all of these line items. And my point in bringing this up in this conversation and why it was important to have this meeting is, as the administration goes to the directors and says, I need you to reduce this percentage, I want there to be a more dynamic conversation about value, right? So while, the easiest thing to do is last one in, first one out, that may be okay for some positions, but I think that it's really important to look at who's providing value. And, and it's not necessarily just fire. There are people, like I said, at the school district, we did this. There's people who can retire, right? There's people whose positions can be changed. There's other opportunities where maybe they're more effective. I think we have to give our directors the ability to have those difficult conversations, understanding that they're difficult conversations. Because the easiest thing to do is to say, okay, looking at this information, the last people that came in, a year ago, we can't afford you anymore. So that's what I don't want. But Yenka, if you can respond to how we're going to be looking at the tasks, and their level of engagement.
Yes, so I wanted to start with I think Commissioner Bermudez and Gonzalez mentioned about performance measures. Part of what we're doing is also assessing performance measures. The county has probably over 600 measures that the departments manage. What we've done is we've selected items that we believe has some level of correlation to the fiscal analysis that we're going to be working on per department. So some measures directly impact the dollars that the departments are going to need. We've pulled a few of the measures. We're working on all the departments currently to assess the validity of the measure and to assess the performance. So that's being done, and that'll be reported. If we need to add more measures as the process goes along, we'll be happy to add more measures that the board is interested in. But I wanted to just mention that the departments currently have over 600 measures that they're using. What we're doing is also validating the accuracy of what's being reported because sometimes there may not be accurate information available that's being reported in performance measures, so we work with departments to make sure what they're reporting is in fact correct and accurate. So that's for performance measures. Now, on the line item detail, I want to underscore that it's a very complicated process. And what I mean by that is we could say the county's budget is $8 billion, but in that $8 billion, there are millions of transactions, and millions of transactions as far as every department, who they're paying, why they're paying, what they're paying for, the volume of what they're paying, the quantity of what they're buying. Those transactions is at where we're operating at this point in time. To do that, we've selected things that we believe are material. There has to be some materiality threshold to be able to do this effectively and efficiently. So we're looking at some material transactions to be able to tell you whether or not the amount that's being budgeted is valid. And when I say valid, I don't mean whether it's useful for the department. I mean, is this in line with the contractual obligation that the board approved? Does this include some level of growth because you anticipate that you're going to add more employees next year, so you need to buy more licenses, or you need to buy more vehicles, or buy more uniform, or assess more training? There's a lot of analysis that goes into a specific line item, and that's what we're working on as far as the budget. And we've obviously discussed with Chairwoman, and we have an idea of where we need to go with the results and the reporting of this. And we'll be sharing it with the board. But I want to just give you a very high-level view that when we talk about county budget, we're talking about millions of transactions across 30 departments. And we prioritize based on threshold, and if we need to change anything based on an issue or a specific operating area or specific program, we do that. I don't know if that answers your question, but I want to give you a quick high-level view on how we are planning to anticipate a report that will be useful for you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I have a question as well.
Yes. By all means.
I would just, say to the Commission Auditor, I know as we're working through this to make sure that we're identifying, I know some positions are funded through general fund and that's where the problem is and some are not. So as we're making these decisions, unfortunately, to let go of folks to make sure that they're from the general fund and not others so that we're not making a mistake going forward.
Yeah, we're only looking at general fund. So I separated, Yinka and I talked about this earlier. I don't want to waste it. Not that we're not going to look at the enterprise funds. Of course we are. And we're working on that. I'm actually bringing different items that deal with that. But I think right now our gap is general fund. So this analysis, that's why I focus this analysis on general fund. Because, we only have a limited amount of time. We can always, right size and make some adjustments in the enterprise. But really, it's about general fund. And you'll notice that the breakdown, there's some enterprise that get a little bit of general fund. So, that's a thing. So that's why we wanted to break it down so that you can see what departments get the bulk from general fund and what that looks like.
I would also add, and this might be to the mayor, I don't know if we've explored the possibility of working with our constitutional offices to pipeline some employees that way, so that way we can minimize the cost of payouts, which will undoubtedly be a heavy load on the county, and that will prevent people from losing their positions completely. That may be an option to consider. As I know they may be growing, they may have a need for employees that we can send that way, and it allows us to help these folks to transition without losing their jobs, and also helps us to avoid the cost of the payout that we will take.
And I would say yes, and also to enterprise departments, right? So there is also an opportunity for them to transition to enterprise departments. So constitutionals and enterprises are an option. And one of the things that I think we need to talk about moving forward is, and we'll be talking about that next meeting, a little bit more about separation and separation options, right? And what that looks like. because within that realm, there's also opportunities, right? So it's not as cut and dry as folks think. Do you have any other questions?
I just want to add one thing that's important, because I think we've touched upon issues that I think are important across the board. But I just want to point out that from the perspective of the Government Efficiency and Transparency Committee, it won't be a 3-month process to find efficiencies. We need to be clear that we need to take this upcoming year as a commission and as committees to continue to find those efficiencies in a way. And when I say efficiencies, some don't impact the budget as directly, some do. But, we had the presentation reference to procurement, and, a lot of things came to light that I think we had never seen. And I think there's been some improvements, but that doesn't mean that we don't continue to seek improvements in that process, because this is just the beginning of it. So I have always seen this process of being more efficient at minimal a 2-year process. And it really should be continuous, to be honest with you. And Commissioner Gonzalez correctly pointed out that zero-based budgeting is something that came into vogue in government in the late probably sometime in the 90s, and it made sense because for a long time, just like maybe the way you reward departments is how they handle their budget. Maybe you give raises based on being more efficient, as opposed to just simply traditionally giving a certain amount. But I just want to remind all my colleagues that I see this beyond this fiscal year. We must continue to do this.
Agreed. And I'm glad you brought that up. So 2 things about zero-based budgets that I think is important. Whenever we talk about the state, the state runs a very different government from us. They don't have a lot of the capital and maintenance needs that we have. So while we go year to year, we also have a series of responsibilities, whether they're from the state, like consent decrees, right, where we're actually complying with
Or unfunded mandates.
or unfunded mandates, right? We also run systems. So when the state does something, they just push it out, into the ether, and when we are the ether, right, that activates that. So while I'm all for accountability, when we talk about mirroring the states too much, I always caution that the services that we provide are very different, because we provide actual services. The state services are on a website, right? Give or take, right? Most of them. Some of them are physical, but even then, those are winding down. I mean, we talk about how the state is going to give up DOH and DEP so that we have to provide that service. Part of the constitutional rollout, with the tax collector, is that the state is moving the responsibility of driver's licenses to the tax collectors. So there is a decoupling from the state level of physical services that are being provided, and that is being pushed on to the counties, and we have to be responsive to that. So that being said, I think that when we speak of the constitutionals, and we will be meeting, I know that we're all talking to them also individually, they are starting up systems, and that has a series of complications. But we know that, at least from the tax collector, part of this deficit is the $120 million that we believe that we will get back from the tax collector. That can't be part of our budget, because that happens in the future. However, I do believe that this board can make decisions as to how that money is going to be used when it returns to us. Because what we don't want is for it to turn into a slush fund, right? Especially knowing that we're going to have an issue in 26. So I think that there needs to be at some point a conversation about that, and how that money, when that money comes back, and how that money comes back. If we have taken from certain accounts that are important, is it going to go back to those? Is it going to go into reserves? What's the plan, right, for that money? Because the other thing is, look, we all have our priorities, and we have all embedded some of those priorities into past budgets. And now everything is on the table. So what we don't want is a mad dash for that money, whatever part comes in the mid-year, or after to try to fill the holes that we're creating now. So to your point about, a long-term commitment, I think it is also important for this board to make a long-term commitment beyond this budget, right? In terms of what happens next year, because we are going to be, and look, I've been here, you've been there, we're going to get a lot of calls. There's a lot of people who are accustomed to getting funding from the county, which are not going to get funding from the county this year. That's a reality, and that's why I wanted to discuss, that there's going to be a reduction in funding, for programming. We have to decide what that looks like. There is going to be a reduction in labor. That's inevitable in some degree or another, especially from these general funds. Now, the placement of those humans, right, and what happens to them is a different conversation. But we have to be honest that you don't get to a balanced budget without some difficult decisions. And that's sort of what I wanted this presentation to be about. And then also to have a conversation at some later point about, the money that comes back in, what are our priorities? It's not part of a budget, right? It might be part of a mid-year, but I think that as a board, this is the time for us to commit to, where that goes, when that comes in, and what that looks like. Yes, Commissioner
And I'll
Steinberg.
just finish off by saying that, and a lot of people have heard me say this over and over again, but it's as we head into a tighter budget season, we really need to make sure that we're distinguishing between what I like to say the nice to haves versus the need to haves, and really make sure we focus on that.
Needs versus wants.
Madam Chair? Oh, no,
Yes.
please. No, please, Chairman.
No, go ahead. I was going to wrap it up.
Thank you, Chairman, but I can go after you. Thank you, Chairman. Actually, I want to thank Chairwoman Regalado and Chairman Bermudez for having the foresight of putting this together, right? Because the folks at home need to know that this conversation is for the most important people in the county, which is the taxpayers.
Agree.
And I love the fact that the chairwoman and the chairman have mentioned deficiencies. And this is a conversation that Carla, Denise, and I have had many times. We need to be more efficient with government. And as a matter of fact, I think that the commission auditor has some great suggestions that we've talked about off the record as how we can make government more efficient. Carla Denise has alluded to it. Government is going to shrink, but to the chairwoman's point, people still need to get great service. And let's be honest, this county has faced difficult budget times in the past. And guess what, folks? We've been able to figure it out. And I know that we're going to be able to figure it out. And I don't want to throw a wrench into the mix, but I am bothered as to one thing. And that is that what I have not seen in here today, and what I hope we'll see in the future, is how we can deliver much needed tax relief for our
I was about
constituents.
to go there.
Especially, yes, for the hardworking families of Miami-Dade County. And you know what? We talk a lot about the state, but we've seen at the state level how, the governor and the legislator, they don't always agree. They disagree on some things, right? But this year, they focused on lowering the tax burden on everyday Floridians. And here, I think we need to do the same. I think we need to focus on needs versus wants, just like Commissioner Steinberg has said, and other core duties and responsibilities that government has to ensure that we need are and balance a budget that's in the best interest of the taxpayers.
Agreed. I'm glad, and I wanted to end with that because obviously to date we have been talking about balancing the budget, assuming that the millage stays flat. And as we all know, the millage staying flat is a tax increase because the property values go up. So if you have a flat millage, taxes go up. So the question is, does this board have the wherewithal? Is there an interest, right, to lower the millage? And that's a question that we will face on July 16th. I will tell you that I have requested a lowering of the millage every year. Some years I've gotten a second, some years I haven't. But I think that as we move forward, our first obligation is to balance the budget. Our second obligation is to find a reduction, because that's what my residents want, you know? That's
what we're here for.
Right. That's what the state is responding to. How we do that is another conversation. But right now, we're just dealing with this number and a balanced budget. But I think it's important to have a conversation about how do we make services more dynamic and better, and how do we ensure that we have done everything that we can, and if possible, to reduce taxes. That's what I would feel comfortable with. I would feel comfortable with reducing taxes. But again, there's pain points associated with that. And there's also what happens next year. So that's why I think it's important to talk about the 20 million that's going to come in, right? And what happens, who this impacts. Because one thing is to say it, and another thing is to do it, and then to stick to it, and understand that that would entail a lot more cutting and a greater sacrifice, you know, from this board. But we shouldn't, that's not off the table. And I feel like at this point, we're all moving in the direction of that's off the table. And as far as I'm concerned, that's not off the table. We can lower the millage. We're still in a space where we can have a reduction in taxes. How we get there, I think the first step is to balance this budget, and then to take another look at it and see what else can we do, you know, beyond what we're required to do. What can we do to make it easier and less financially impactful to live in Miami-Dade County?
And Madam Chairwoman, if I may chime in, I agree, but this can only happen. I think the administration knows this, and they've said this in the past. And I just want to quote Chairman Bermudez is we need the information. So I am expecting a budget on July 9th, because I think the only way that we're going to be able to do this is if we're going to be able to have enough time to dive in and have these conversations. I think July 9th is
July 15th, Commissioner. I'm sorry.
July 15th. Right. Yeah, that July 15th is the deadline to give us a budget, right? So we had requested it a little bit earlier. I will say this, we're gonna set the millage on July 16th. We can't raise it, but we can lower it, right? So there's always that possibility, but it's always tight. It's always tight.
So I would ask the administration que se ponga la pila, please.
Right.
Because
That's
because
I'm not going to do a Soto translation.
We're going to have one day.
Put on your batteries.
Yes. One of the things before we wrap up, I want to thank everybody, but I want to add just one thing before we thank everyone that made this possible, including my colleagues that are here. I just want to say that while I do believe in tax relief, I wouldn't limit it. Personally, sometimes lowering the millage, a minimal amount, is not real tax relief. Real tax relief sometimes is looking at those who need the most. And finding a creative way to give them real tax relief. So I hope, I got you.
No,
I hope nothing's off the table is what I'm trying to get at, because I'd rather be sometimes, and this is not applicable necessarily to any of us here, but there are governments that lower their millage rate, and it's the equivalent of a meal at Burger King. That doesn't solve the problem. For those who are in the most need, those who may have owned their properties in Dade County for 35 years, it's their homestead, and now all of a sudden, they can't move because they have to end up paying quadruple the amount of what house that their kids grew up in, and they want to stay in Miami-Dade County. And I think those are the things we need to look at. So,
And listen, and as you know, I wasn't able to lower the millage, but every year I did put money into Save Your Seniors, because I believe in that, right? And I think that those are the folks that really need the help. That's not something that's contemplated in this budget, right? Because obviously, Save Your Seniors goes back to the 1992, $100. So for those seniors that at some point got 675, right? That's a big change. That's a big change.
Yeah, well, it's
So,
it's just like
but those are all things. Things I think we need
I
to
like
consider.
I like where Chairman Bermudez is going with it, right? Because Miami-Dade County leads, and we've heard how the governor talks about property tax relief. I'm not saying that we have to eliminate property taxes completely, but it would be nice. For example, you have folks that have purchased their home, lived in their home for 30 years, and they're still dishing out a lot of money every single year to just stay in a home that they have already paid for. What I'm hearing from Chairman Bermudez is these are conversations we can have, right? We can be creative, we can be efficient, and just have conversations as to, hey, maybe we can lead the way on something else, right?
Absolutely. I did want to thank the administration.
Made David very nervous.
Time to be here. David's a District 12 resident, so I just go and knock on his door. No, just kidding, David. I'm not going to bug you, but thank you to the administration for taking the time. All the directors that are here for also taking their time to listen to this conversation. Our members of the great fire department that we have and other departments that are here, and I want to thank Yinka too, who is our right hand for numbers at the commission. Unfortunately for him, he's looking over there and he's saying, "Oh my God, now I got to do 20 more things before July 15th." But he's up. I know he and his team are up to the task. But I do want to thank everybody for taking their time, and obviously my colleagues and Chairwoman Regalado, because we did have the intent. Both of these committees are, I believe, going to be very focused, even moving beyond this budget cycle, toward bringing those efficiencies to light, certainly by the next budget of next year, I would hope, in even a more concrete way, which I think is very doable, by the way. I don't think anything should be off the table.
I agree, and I think that the administration would agree with us on that we're looking at everything. And I think that the key is to be consistent. So that's all that I'm asking the board to do is to be consistent, right? So as long as we're all on the same page in terms of, we want to look at all of our options, and we understand that this is about the right sizing of government, and the idea is to bring a budget that focuses on residents and services to residents. That's what I'm focused on. I really want a residents first budget. And when I say residents first, I'm talking about, ensuring that they're getting a good service for what they're paying for, and that we're providing them with everything that we have to provide them with. And all this other stuff is great. It's nice, to Commissioner Steinberg's point, it's nice, but it's not necessary. So I think we need to lead with the necessary services and ensure that those are being provided in an efficient way, and take it from there and really look at the areas that are, that came from the growth that we had in 2020, 2021, and 2022, because I think a lot of those services are no longer needed. And a lot of services that the county commission and this government has provided, are no longer necessary. I think there's different ways to do it, and that's what I'm asking everyone to look at. So thank everyone. Thank you all for your patience. And it's going to be a sprint. But I think as long as we're all on the same page, I think it'll be a very effective one. And I want to thank you all for coming. One thing is to talk about the budget, and another thing is to show up and sit at the committee. So I really appreciate it. So thank you all.
Definitely, and I know we're all maybe not looking forward to long budget meetings, but maybe this year. I think the most important thing is that I've learned being here is that everybody here is very conscientious and committed to creating that culture that we're trying to, all of us, including the administration, are trying to create here in Miami-Dade County. And that's not a slap at the people that were here before. It's just that times change and you've got to do things differently. And tomorrow, hopefully, we have a shorter meeting.
Yes.
Trying to convince my...
Thank you, everyone. This meeting is adjourned.